Gives me great pleasure and a real honor to introduce Irv Adler, who will be presenting this afternoon's program, Researching Jewish Genealogy. Thanks so much for being with us, Irv.
Well, hello to all of you. I'd like to thank you for joining me as I discuss, for the most part, my Jewish genealogical journey and the resources that I used and continue to use. Also, I would like to thank the Allen County Public Library and its world-class genealogy center and staff for giving me the opportunity to present to you. The picture you see is of my paternal grandmother, Sura Kafovi, her brother Jan, and her parents Isaac and Regina. It was probably taken in the early 1900s. I show this to you because there were relatives behind these relatives. And like many of you, I would like to know who they were, where they lived, and how they influenced me. Today, my presentation will be in three parts. I will start off by telling you what got me started in Jewish genealogy. Then the bulk of my presentation will cover resources that I have used and continue to use. Hopefully, I will identify some resources that you were not familiar with or have not used. I will end my presentation with a brief bullet point summary of some things to consider as you do your Jewish genealogy research. First of all, let me say that 10 years ago, Jewish genealogy was the furthest thing from my mind. My Jewish genealogy journey was totally unplanned. In August 2010, my wife, Fran, and I were on the last leg of a 3-day trip to Europe. We visited Prague, then Budapest, with our last stop being Vienna. Fran had never been there before. We got to Vienna late afternoon on Sunday, August the 8th, and decided to visit Judenplatz. This was, and still is, an area in the center of the city where Jews live since medieval times and where there is a monument to memorialize the 66,000 Viennese Jews murdered during the Holocaust. Located in one corner of the plaza was a museum that had been erected over the site of a medieval synagogue. Fran and I went inside. There was a woman sitting behind the entrance counter. I asked her where I could find information about my maternal grandmother, Clara Nichtern, who I thought had been murdered at Auschwitz. The woman said we should go to the documentation of Austrian resistance to Dove, which we did the next morning. The activities at Dove are focused on three major areas: collecting documents related to the Holocaust in Austria, doing research on resistance and persecution of Austrian citizens, and informing the Austrian public, especially pupils and students, about Austria's National Socialist past. From the archivist, I found that my grandmother was murdered at a place called Mali Trotzenitz and not at Auschwitz. The archivist recommended that we visit the Israelitische Kultusgemeinde Wien, the offices of the Jewish community of Vienna, also called the IKG, and the archives of the city of Vienna, to find out more about my grandmother. At the IKG, I found the original birth records of my parents. I took photographs of these records. Here is an example of such an original record. At the archives of the city of Vienna, I found telephone books showing my grandmother's address through 1940, but not afterwards. What happened to her? I eventually found the answer. From those telephone books, known as the layman directories, I have learned quite a lot about where my family members lived in Vienna. So, what was supposed to be a 5-day vacation turned out to be 2.5 days of research, which ultimately has had a great effect on my life these past 10 years. When we got back from our trip, I discovered 107 letters written to my mother, from my grandmother, and other relatives. I had them translated. I discovered names of people, presumably relatives, that I had never heard of. Who were these people? This was what got me started on my Jewish genealogical research, to find out who these people were and how they were related to me. When I started my research, I was mainly focused on Holocaust research as it related to Vienna. Although still focused on Holocaust research, my research has evolved into broader genealogical research as I wanted to know more about the relatives I had never heard about and how these relatives related to the immediate family that I grew up with in New York City. As I've gotten more involved in genealogical research, the concept of remembering has become more important to me. I want to pass down the information that I have found of my ancestors to my successor generations. Based on this idea of remembering, 6 years ago, I dedicated a stone of remembrance for my grandmother at her last known place of residence before she was deported to Mali Trutzenitz. The stone commemorates her life as a Jewish person who lived in Vienna. This is why I am doing Jewish genealogy. At least from my perspective, where you came from and who came before you has a big influence on who you are. In my case, Vienna, Austria, Warsaw, Schwarsk and Tarnów, Poland, and Lviv, Ukraine. The last three cities being part of the pre-World War I Austro-Hungarian province of Galicia. With this as a brief introduction as to why I am pursuing Jewish genealogy, I want to let you know that for the most part, I am going to talk about what I have done in researching my Jewish genealogy. I am not going to present a general course in doing Jewish genealogy, and I am not going to provide listings of the many resources available except to say that these resources are out there. However, I am going to start off by pointing out one resource that will lead you to many others. So let's start. One basic question is where to start to look for information. I am a big fan of jewishgen.org, so let's start there. The jewishgen.org website serves as an umbrella for a vast number of different databases, discussion groups, and links to other websites that provide Jewish genealogical information. It is one-stop shopping for Jewish genealogy research. I am now going to show you, or take you a little tour, and show you some of the services so that you can get an idea of what is available to you. The first place to start is with the Unified Search Engine. This is a finding aid that will help you locate information on ancestors based on names and locations. It will provide links to other databases containing records of the people for whom you are searching. Sorry, wrong thing, discussion groups. All right. There are discussion groups where you can ask questions, share research, get responses, and establish connections with other researchers. The discussion groups allow you to connect to thousands of Jewish geners. There are listings of various databases by type and by country. There is a list of research groups by country. These groups were formerly called special interest groups. Participating in a research group allows you to contact people or engage in research projects specific to that country or region. There is a learning center that provides many online and interactive courses in Jewish genealogy to help you find and trace your ancestors. And there is the Jewish Gen online worldwide burial registry, JOBAR, which is a database of names and other identifying information from more than 3 million Jewish burial records worldwide. I would suggest that you take a good look through the jewishgen.org website. As you can see, there is a host of available resources there to get you started. also databases available through genealogy service providers such as Ancestry, MyHeritage, Family Search, and Find My Past. These provide links to record databases and provide details and images of specific records that may be tied to the individual that you are researching. These are available at the Allen County Public Library Genealogy Center or through subscription. In addition, there are some very specific databases associated with geographic regions where there were large Jewish populations, such as JRI Poland and Gesher Galicia. I would also like to point out databases associated with World War II claims conferences. For example, Finbuch is a database associated with the Austrian Claims Conference. Because these databases deal with restitution claims and are tied to personal property, they provide information and links to property ownership records for individuals whose property was confiscated during World War II. Here is a little more detail on JRI Poland and Gesher Galicia, which are focused solely on the Jewish populations for the regions covered. Gesher Galicia covers the pre-World War I Galician territory of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. JRI Poland covers Russian-held Polish territories, the Pale of Settlement, and has some overlap with Galicia. I have used their databases to find information on my ancestors, all of whom originated from the blue and green areas shown on the map. JRI Poland and Gesher Galicia both provide information on and links to vital records and how to locate these vital records. JRI and Gesher Galicia are engaged in projects to expand their records and to provide meaning and history behind these records. In the case of JRI Poland, with their help, I was able to find the birth record of my paternal grandmother, Sura Kafovi, whose picture was on my introductory slide. Since my paternal grandmother was born in Warsaw, Poland, I thought the document was written in Polish. And since Fort Wayne has sister city ties to Poland, I thought I could get the document translated locally. No go. With the help of JRI Poland, I found the birth record was not written in Polish, but in Tsarist Russian, because at the time of my grandmother's birth, Warsaw belonged to the Tsar. Know anyone who can read Tsarist Russian script? I didn't. Working with JRI Poland, I was able to obtain translations of the key information obtained in this document. With regard to Gesher Galicia, besides using their database to find names of relatives, what I find most useful is their efforts to expand what is known about the Jewish history and Jewish population of Galicia, which by 1880 had grown to almost 700,000. About that time is when the Great Migration of Galician Jews began. And it was this migration that led my ancestors from Tarnów and Lviv, known as Lemberg at that time, to move to Vienna and to London. Their quarterly publication, the Galiciana, provides a wealth of information on the history of Galicia. If you are interested in detailed maps of Galician cities where your ancestors might have lived, Gesher Galicia is the place to look. Getting back to Ancestry and MyHeritage, two providers that I probably have used the most to search for relatives. Both are somewhat similar. Ancestry claims to have more than twice as many records as MyHeritage in its database. Both have provided me with many useful links to record databases, and Ancestry has the largest DNA database. Here is an example of how I used a name search to find my person of interest, Julius Garfinkel. Using MyHeritage, I generated a list of names to examine. Based on what I knew about Julius Garfinkel, many of the names in the list were not my guy, but a few were my Julius Garfinkel. And there were a number of record databases associated with my Julius Garfinkel, such as the 1940 US Census database. I also found similar information in Ancestry. Both Ancestry and MyHeritage provide links to a digital image of the census data. I am showing the Ancestry census data summary screen here because Ancestry provided an easier to read summary view of the census data. Note the names Elsa Nichtern and also Julius Garfinkel. I will be coming back to her and to Julius Garfinkel shortly. The 4 service providers shown here provide detailed DNA analysis services. In fact, you may know them better for their DNA services. They all make big marketing pitches about how they can help you discover and find your relatives through DNA connections. My guess is that by now you have read newspaper accounts and watched TV shows about this. Based on DNA matches and comparisons with the unique ethnicity databases, these companies will provide links to possible relatives and give estimates of your ethnicity, and in my case, make an estimate of my Jewish ethnicity. I am not going to say very much about the topic of DNA. There are plenty of resources that you can turn to in order to make comparisons between the providers and help you interpret your DNA results. In fact, the Allen County Public Library Genealogy Center has an excellent DNA special interest group which meets monthly. What I would like to speak a little about is the genealogy tree building capability of one of these providers, that of MyHeritage. You can build a genealogical tree with all 4 providers. I built my tree on MyHeritage. Why? About 1.5 years ago, MyHeritage made an announcement about their theory of family relativity. Their plan was to build a worldwide family tree based on finding DNA linkages in their database. I would like to point out that MyHeritage is the parent company of Genie.com, founded in 2006, and as of May 2020, has 140 million profiles of persons to which MyHeritage has access. This turned out to be very helpful to me, as you will see in a few moments. MyHeritage developed computer programs that would find the DNA linkages among people in their DNA database in order to build this worldwide family tree. MyHeritage established a procedure which made it very easy to transfer one's data from another DNA service provider to MyHeritage. So I uploaded my DNA data from my service provider, which was Family Tree DNA. I also decided to build a very rudimentary family tree consisting of me, my parents, and my grandparents, a total of 7 people, as a place to start. After I created my family tree, I noticed the appearance of a small green circle on the upper corner of one of the boxes of my family members. Here it is. It was identified as a smart match. I clicked it. Nothing happened. About 2 hours later, when I came back to my computer, I noticed that I had received an email from MyHeritage saying that I had smart matches. I was astonished. From the information in the email, I identified more than 20 relatives that I had been looking for the past 5 years. Small boxes with these names appeared on the family tree, which grew from 7 to more than 27. These were my English relatives. I never knew they existed before the words English relative appeared in one of my grandmother's letters, and whose names I had never heard of before. My cousin mentioned them to me about 5 years earlier. These were the relatives that were among the family members that had emigrated from Galicia during the 1880s. After spending 5 years trying to find them, there they were, about 2 hours after I had used the MyHeritage Smart Match feature. Since then, using the Smart Match feature, which is linked to the Genie database, my tree has grown to 436 people. I can't say whether the other services would or would not have provided me as many genealogical links, but I have been very pleased with the MyHeritage Smart Match capability. Getting back to MyHeritage's DNA-based theory of family relativity, I haven't had any luck with this. I get regular emails from MyHeritage with matches typically totaling 100 centimorgans or less of matched DNA, and no genealogical links that I have been able to find to any of my ancestors. In any case, I have yet to find the true DNA match using MyHeritage. I have found good DNA matches excuse me, using Ancestry and family tree DNA, but so far I've had no luck connecting with these folks. Because of the effects of endogamy on Jewish DNA, I use a cutoff of 150 centimorgans as the point I begin to consider the identified match from any DNA service as a good DNA match. This is based on the Lara Diamond rule of a total matched DNA of at least 150 centimorgans, at least one segment match of at least 20 centimorgans, and at least two segment matches of at least 10 centimorgans each. Others might choose a different cutoff, but this is what I have been using. And Laura Diamond gave a presentation at the Allen County Library going over Jewish endogamy back in February of 2019. Moving on. Another resource in researching Jewish genealogy are the records kept by the Jewish religious community, and in my case, the IKG Wien, the Jewish community of Vienna, where I found the original birth records of my parents and vital records for other relatives. Shown here is the original birth record of my mother. These records of births, deaths, marriages, and divorces also contain names and addresses of other relatives. The IKG also maintains an archive of documents associated with the Viennese Jewish community, especially documents that were generated by the IKG during the time it was under the control of the Nazis. The IKG provided me with copies of the emigration questionnaire filled out by my parents and other relatives. Here is the emigration questionnaire filled out by my father, Joseph Adler. The emigration questionnaire had to be filled out by every Viennese Jew who wanted to leave Austria after the country was annexed by Nazi Germany. This document listed profession, members of household, addresses, language proficiency, desired emigration location, and other personal information. The emigration questionnaire could provide a great deal of historical background on a relative. Besides the IKG, there are other IKGs. Besides the IKG,
Irv, you got muted.
When did I get muted?
I don't know, but keep going.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. All right, 15. There are also many records and collections of historical documents kept in archives, museums, and special collections. Just to mention a few, the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. has a vast collection of documents and research materials related to all aspects of the Holocaust. The staff of the U.S. Holocaust Museum was very helpful to me as I was doing Holocaust research and researching for my relatives. In fact, Megan Lewis, staff librarian at the U.S. Holocaust Museum, was at the Allen County Public Library Genealogy Center last November and gave a presentation on Holocaust research. The Vienna Library in London has Holocaust-related documents and other historical documents related to the Jewish population in England, especially focused on British activities geared to helping European Jews flee Nazi persecution. The Leo Baeck Institute, with locations in New York City and Berlin, houses collections that focus on the history of German-speaking Jews. Its collection covers centuries of Jewish life in Central Europe before the Holocaust. It is a very good resource on pre-World War II German Jewry. Currently, it is involved in an international project to document 1,700 years of Jews in the Rhineland. If you are researching your German Jewish ancestry, the Leo Baeck Institute is a good source for information. Yad Vashem in Jerusalem contains the central database of Holocaust victims. the largest Holocaust victim database. It also maintains a database of pages of testimony. The page of testimony not only provides information on the person who died and that person's immediate relatives, but also provides the name of the submitter. In many cases, this could be a relative. I have used the World Jewish Relief Archives in London to help me find information on my mother, who was working as a domestic in London from September 1938 till February 1940, when she left England to come to the USA. Originally known as the Central Fund for German Jewry, the World Jewish Relief Archives contains information about the 65,000 German and Austrian Jewish refugees that registered with the German Jewish Aid Committee and came to the UK from 1933 to 1939. It also includes documentation on the 10,000 European children who came to London with the Kindertransport. Founded by Steven Spielberg in 1994, the USC Holocaust Shoah Foundation is located in Los Angeles. It has more than 110,000 hours of video testimonies from over 50,000 Holocaust survivors from 65 countries in its video history archives. Jewish Gen has very recently announced that they have formed a partnership with the USC Holocaust Foundation and will provide Jewish Holocaust Survivor Testimony Database Index accessible through Jewish Gen. City and national libraries and archives in places such as New York, Washington, D.C., London, Berlin, Vienna, Paris, Warsaw, Lviv, formerly Lemberg, and in our own Allen County contain treasure troves of records, documents, and newspapers. And I can say without hesitation that it would be worth a trip to the Allen County Public Library to check out their Jewish genealogy holdings. Until early last year, the Arolsen Archives had been known as the International Tracing Service. The ITS was established in 1943 by the British Red Cross and moved to its present location at Bad Arolsen, Germany in 1946. In 2019, it changed its name to the Arolsen Archives. The Arolsen Archives contain the names of 17.5 million Holocaust victims and survivors in a variety of documents, including about 50 million name cards. About 21 million name cards have been digitized and are available online. There are numerous other available documents, such as transport lists, concentration camp records, victim search requests, and photos of objects belonging to victims. When I accessed the archives for the first time, it was with the help of the U.S. Holocaust Museum's ITS program manager at that time, Dr. Elizabeth Anthony, who, by the way, has given 2 previous presentations on the ITS at the Allen County Public Library. She carried out my ITS research, which provided many name cards and other documents in addition to the 2 name cards shown. When I accessed the Arolsen Archives on my own, I found it difficult and confusing to use. Initially, I tried to put in as much as I knew about the person for whom I was searching. I found very little information, and most of the time, nothing. When I used only the last name of the person I was searching, I got many more hits, including the person for whom I was searching. So my experience has been the more general, the better. I am sure that Arolsen is working hard to make its search engine more user-friendly. Arolsen also can provide direct support through a fee-paid research service. Getting back to the 2 name cards shown here. The cards belong to 2 of my relatives, Max and Paul Spielman, names I discovered in my grandmother's letters. The name cards also give their timeline to the camps and told me that Max and Paul had survived the Holocaust, which was totally unknown to me at that time. Max left his displaced persons camp in Germany and emigrated to Australia. Paul left his displaced persons camp also in Germany and emigrated to Israel. Max died in 1992, Paul is still alive, and I speak with him regularly. This November, the Arolsen Archives will hold a virtual conference on deportations, in the Nazi era, and will present speakers who are researching this topic. If you are interested, you can find more details on this conference on their website. A great deal of Jewish genealogical information can be gleaned from various scholarly texts, research publications, society publications, and books. Here are a few examples. Avoteno identifies itself as the International Research Journal for Jewish Genealogy and is available at the Allen County Public Library Genealogy Center. Avoteno has been publishing scholarly articles on Jewish genealogy since 1985. The Galiziana is the quarterly publication of Geshe Galicia, which I talked about earlier. Dienstmädchen Emigration, the Galizianas, and the annual publication of the Indiana Jewish Historical Society are among the many publications providing period histories of Jews living in various countries under various circumstances, many of which are also available at the Allen County Public Library Genealogy Center. By reading these publications, not only can you learn a lot about various topics of interest, but many of these publications have footnotes and references which open totally new avenues for investigation and opportunities to find out more information about your relatives. The scholarly publication, Dienstmädchen Emigration, gives an example of what you can find in footnotes. The book was based on a doctoral research study carried out by Traude Boloff, who was studying the 20,000 forgotten Jewish women who, by virtue of a British work permit that allowed them to come to the UK and work in private homes as domestic servants, were able to escape from Austria and Germany in 1938 and 1939. This included my mother and several of my relatives. It probably saved the lives of many Austrian women, my mother included. I had no clue whatsoever about any of this. In the text of this book, I found the name of the Austrian employment agency that placed women in domestic servant positions in English households. The footnote associated with the name of this agency gave the address of the agency. It turned out that this address was identified without a name in one of my grandmother's letters, which said that in late September 1938, a person from the employment agency at that address came by to find out if my mother had left Vienna. Another footnote in Dienstmädchen Emigration, the name and issue date of a newspaper published by the IKG announced to the Jewish population possible emigration paths from Vienna, including household jobs in England that were available for Jewish women. I was able to get copies of this newspaper, Die Zionistische Rundschau, through the National Library in Vienna. The June issue of this newspaper contained the announcement. Then from the archives of the city of Vienna, I obtained a link to the listings of local Vienna newspapers, and in the June issue of one of them, Die Neue Freie Presse, I discovered the advertisement shown here that gave the name and address of the employment agency whose address was in my grandmother's letter. This is how my mother escaped from Vienna. Photos and documents provide valuable information on how people lived and dressed about their journeys to freedom. Here are two photos. The one on top, taken in the 1930s, shows the apartment building where my mother and grandmother lived from the early 1920s, and in the case of my mother, when she left in 1938, in September 1938. My grandmother lived there till 1941. The photo shows a nice apartment building. My mother and grandmother were earning enough money that they could live in a decent working class neighborhood in an outer district of Vienna, not far from the Schönbrunn Palace. The building survived the war, and probably because of its non-strategic location, and looks today almost as it looked then. The second photo, taken sometime during the period of World War I, shows my mother, my grandmother, and grandfather. My grandfather was conscripted to fight in the Austrian army. From some very early letters that my mother had, I found out that my grandfather was sent to the Polish front. Besides the clothing reflecting the fashion of the time, it would be very interesting to find out more about my grandfather's military history based on his military dress. Then there is my mother's Reisepass, her German passport. At first, I didn't realize how much information it contained. After spending years trying to find a copy of her domestic permit, the document that allowed her to enter and stay in England, there it was, a stamp on a page in her passport. On another page, I found my mother's UK exit authorization permits. Using this information, I was able to trace her exit from the UK, which allowed me to identify the ship on which she sailed, the ship's passenger list, and details of her travel to the USA. Then, of course, there is Google. And what will we do without Google? Sometimes you do Google searches and you get nothing. And sometimes the searches can lead to remarkable discoveries. In general, I have found Google very useful. It has provided me with links to Ancestry, MyHeritage, and to other resources, and has helped me find information on relatives or historical references, like the one shown here. Earlier, I said that I was going to come back to Elsa Nichtern. By now, you have seen her name several times on previous slides and probably know that she was my mother. From her travel documents, I know how she got to New York City, but where did she go and where did she work after she arrived? I got the answer following leads generated from a Google search. One day, I decided to Google Elsa Nichtern. A link to a 2015 article which appeared in Avoteno, written by a Carol Vogel, came up. Carol Vogel's article was about her Viennese grandparents and how they were able to come to America and work as physicians through the help of the National Committee for the Resettlement of Foreign Physicians. A footnote on the last page of the article identified an Elsa Nichtern. She was the niece of the aunt by marriage, who was the sister of Carol's grandmother. The footnote gave the name of the person, Julius Garfinkel, and in whose home my mother lived and worked as a live-in maid. And now you know why I was researching Julius Garfinkel. Another Google link went to the 1940 census data in Ancestry. This slide is similar to the slide that I showed earlier in my talk. The Ancestry record identified the location and residence of the Garfinkel household, which also included my mother, as well as Julius's wife Fanny and their children. As part of my searching on Ancestry, I found out that Fanny's birth name was Mann. I believe Fanny was also related to my mother through my great-grandmother, Eva Nichtern, born Mann. In one of my grandmother's letters, I found out that the Nichterns were able to come to the US through the help of a relative. In a later letter, the relative was identified as a member of the family of Julius Garfinkel, most probably Fanny Mann Garfinkel. Also, Carol's grandparents were named Levy and were Viennese. I had Levy relatives who emigrated from Galicia to Vienna in the late 1800s. Maybe Carol and I are related. In fact, I actually contacted Carol today through MyHeritage, and we're starting to have a discussion. Anyway, I plan to explore this by contacting Carol, which I've already done, and we'll have a discussion on a little more about her grandparents. And all of this came from Googling Elsa Nichtern. So, you are thinking about taking a trip to the old country to find out more about your Jewish genealogy. A few words about making an ancestral trip, which is a great way to find out more about your family's history and where your ancestors came from. In my case, my family came from Galicia, from the 3 cities that are now part of Poland, and from one city that is in the Ukraine. In August 2019, I linked up with a person in the 2019 International Association of Jewish Genealogical Societies conference, which I'll say IAJGS from now on, in Cleveland, who was a recommended guide and researcher. Over the next few months, the details of the ancestral trip were worked out. Which cities, how much time in each city, travel arrangements, archival visits, city visits, and specific location visits, depending on what came out of the local research. We were good to go for end May 2020. Then came COVID-19. Now everything has been postponed indefinitely. However, if you're available to take an ancestral trip, I would encourage it. You should be able to find a lot about your ancestors and learn a lot about your ancestors. So I have identified here a few of the issues that you should consider as you plan your trip. What do you want to accomplish, who is going, and who is planning, and there's some other details below that. Before I conclude my talk, I would like to make a quick plug about what I hope will interest you as you work on your Jewish genealogy research. 2.5 years ago, the Northeast Indiana Jewish Genealogy Society was established. Its mission is to provide education and educational resources to people interested in Jewish genealogy. To that purpose, we have presentations that are open to the public. Here is a list of our upcoming public programs. Meet Your Mishpacha is an open house, and it's also part of this month's Family History Month at the Genealogy Center. So Meet Your Mishpacha, I said, is an open house where our goal is to provide support to folks, maybe some like yourself, who are looking to explore their Jewish genealogy. Let them know about the Fort Wayne Jewish Family Histories Project being worked on by members of the Northeast Indiana Jewish Genealogy Society, and about the archival resources available at the Indiana Jewish Historical Society. Also, we will have a program on photogenealogy presented by Maureen Taylor this November. We'll have a program on Poland and Galicia presented by Mark Halpern next February, a program on Indiana synagogues presented by Wendy Soltz of the Ball State University History Department, and this will be next April, and then a program on his one-step tools for genealogical research and preparing for the release of the 1950 census presented by Stephen Morse in May of next year. The first two programs will definitely be virtual. Starting with our February 2021 program, we are hoping that our presenters will be able to come to the Allen County Public Library to be able to present. However, this will depend completely on the situation with coronavirus. And if our presenters can't make it to Fort Wayne, the presentations will be virtual. And if they are able to make it to Fort Wayne, we also plan to live stream the presentations so that if some of you are unable to come to the Allen County Public Library, you can still see the presentation. So you can get more information on the Northeast Indiana Jewish Genealogy Society and our programs by visiting our website. And now a few final thoughts. So first thing is, what is it you're trying to find out? You should try to identify everything you think you know or don't know, and talk with your family members to the extent possible, which is not always the case. Go through the records, see what you have. Keep a file. It really helps greatly to be organized. And I say, be prepared for fits and starts. This is not a straight line. In the case of Jewish genealogy, names and languages can cause a problem. I'd say be persistent and have lots of patience. And the key, remember that you are not in this alone. There are lots of help and resources available to you. You can go to the Allen County Public Library Genealogy Center, or you can join a Jewish Genealogy Center. You can find one near you by going on the international website, or if you live in Indiana, you can go to our website and decide if you want to join. There are lots of webinars that'll cover various topics of Jewish genealogy, and you can always take some courses. Basically, remember, this is detective work. I'd say start, and I wish you a lot of luck. And finally, I hope that I have provided you with some ideas on researching your Jewish genealogy, and I thank you very much for attending my presentation, and I'll be glad to take any questions.